The first thing I noticed when I pulled into my driveway was the shiny metal chain wrapped around my front door like I was some kind of prisoner. For a second, I thought maybe someone was trying to rob me or worse. But when I spotted the bright pink flyer taped right above the padlock, I knew exactly who was behind it. Marlene Edwards, the president of our HOA, in all her middle-aged, power-tripping glory. I yanked the flyer off and read it. Violation: unauthorized alterations to front landscaping. Property secured until compliance is verified. What the hell? Landscaping? I had planted 2 rose bushes in my front yard last week. 2. And now she thought she could chain me out of my own house? I slammed my truck door and stormed up to the porch. The chain was thick, bolted to the door handle and looped around the frame. Marlene had really gone for it, like she was starring in her own petty reality show. I looked around the street, half expecting her to pop out from behind a bush with a clipboard. No sign of her, but I did spot a few neighbors peeking through their blinds. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith immediately. No way was I letting this stand. While I waited, I sat on the tailgate of my truck, arms crossed, stewing. Every neighbor who walked past gave me that awkward half-wave like they didn't want to get involved. Typical. About 20 minutes later, a van pulled up and a guy in coveralls hopped out. His name was Jerry, and he whistled low when he saw the chain. "Man, what did you do? Rob a bank?" he joked. "You won't believe it," I said. "The HOA president chained my door because she didn't like my landscaping." Jerry shook his head and got to work. Took him less than 5 minutes to cut the chain and pop the lock off. I opened my door and finally stepped inside, but the anger was still burning in my chest. "Hey, you want me to invoice you now?" Jerry asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I grinned. "Actually, bill Marlene Edwards. She works for the HOA. This was their doing." Jerry laughed. "You got it, man." Before he left, I made sure to take plenty of pictures. The chain, the lock, the flyer with Marlene's signature at the bottom. My next call was to a lawyer buddy of mine from college. I wasn't just gonna get reimbursed for the locksmith. No, Marlene had just declared war and I was ready to fight back. I didn't have to wait long for the next move. By the time the locksmith van disappeared down the street, a beige golf cart with the HOA logo stenciled on the side came sputtering up to my curb like some sad parade float. Marlene Edwards sat behind the wheel wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, as if she were shielding herself from judgment rather than the sun. She hopped out with surprising energy for someone whose entire personality revolved around issuing citations. In her hand, she clutched a manila folder thicker than a Sunday newspaper. Her heels clicked sharply against the driveway as she marched toward me, her mouth already forming words before she even stopped moving. "You," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You have no right to tamper with HOA enforcement actions." "You chained my front door shut," I said coolly. "That's illegal confinement, Marlene." "Nonsense," she barked, waving the folder like a sword. Section 16, Paragraph 4, Subsection A of the Neighborhood Code allows emergency property control measures in cases of egregious violations. I crossed my arms and let her rant. The longer she talked, the deeper the hole she was digging. 2 unauthorized rose bushes, she continued, her voice rising, and an unapproved garden gnome. That's grounds for immediate intervention. I raised an eyebrow. A garden gnome? She flipped through the folder with dramatic flair, pulling out a grainy photo clearly taken from the sidewalk. There, nestled between my rose bushes, was a tiny ceramic gnome holding a fishing rod. "This," she said, stabbing the photo with her finger, "violates the Uniform Aesthetics Clause." "You took pictures of my front yard without permission," I said. "That's trespassing. It's public view. I have every right." Before I could respond, a black and white cruiser rolled quietly up the street and stopped at the curb. Officer Ramos, a guy I knew from a few neighborhood barbecue fundraisers, stepped out. His eyes took in the scene: the cut chain still lying on the porch, the mangled padlock, Marlene waving papers around like a lunatic. "Afternoon," Ramos said, adjusting his belt. "Got a call about a possible unlawful entry." "That's right," I said. "The HOA president here chained my front door shut while I was at work." Ramos turned to Marlene, his expression neutral but not particularly sympathetic. "Madam, is that true?" I was enforcing HOA regulations, she huffed. He violated multiple aesthetics clauses, and we had to secure the property to prevent further degradation. Ramos jotted something down in his notebook. Did you have a court order? A court order? Of course not. The HOA has autonomous authority under the covenants. Ramos gave her a long, slow look. Madam, you can't just lock someone out of their house without legal backing. That's criminal trespass and potentially unlawful imprisonment. Marlene's face went from smug to pale in about 3 seconds. I suggest you stay right here, Ramos said. He radioed for backup, his voice calm but firm. Marlene opened her mouth as if to argue, but thought better of it. She stood stiffly by the golf cart, clutching her folder like a life raft. While we waited, I stepped inside to grab the paperwork I had started assembling after the locksmith left. I had already printed out the HOA bylaws, highlighting every section Marlene had trampled over, and even included a few state statutes about unlawful entry and property interference. Old habits die hard. Back in college, I had been president of the debate team. I knew how to build a case. When I returned, 2 more officers were pulling up. They spoke briefly with Ramos, then approached Marlene. Mrs. Edwards, one of them said, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. You can't do this, she shrieked. I'm the HOA president. You're being detained for investigation of unlawful entry and property tampering, the officer said calmly as he guided her toward the cruiser. The neighbors weren't so shy anymore. A small crowd had gathered across the street, phones out, recording every second. I caught sight of Mr. Jensen from 3 houses down, laughing quietly behind his hand. As they loaded Marlene into the car, I turned to Ramos. Do I need to file anything official? He nodded. It would help. Come by the station later today. Also, you might want to think about a restraining order. I thanked him and watched as the cruiser pulled away, Marlene's golf cart abandoned at the curb like a broken toy. The aftermath was pure chaos. Within an hour, the HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Flyers went up on every door, hastily printed and crammed into plastic sheet protectors to shield them from the afternoon sun. I got my copy shoved through my mailbox slot with a note attached, mandatory attendance. I debated ignoring it. But then again, this was my chance. When I walked into the clubhouse that evening, the air was thick with tension. Dozens of residents packed the folding chairs, some glaring, some whispering. At the front of the room, the remaining board members huddled behind a long plastic table, looking like kids caught cheating on a test. Richard Gilmore, the vice president, took the microphone. His voice cracked as he tried to sound authoritative. Due to recent events, he began, we are considering a temporary suspension of Mrs. Edwards' duties pending further investigation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I raised my hand. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Has the board considered the legality of her actions? I asked loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Because I have evidence here of unlawful confinement, trespassing, and property damage. I held up a thick folder, the same one I had brought to the police station earlier. Every eye in the room locked onto it like it was a live grenade. Richard coughed awkwardly. We, are reviewing all applicable statutes. Good, I said. Because if this isn't addressed properly, I'll be involving not just the civil courts but the state attorney's office. And I'll make sure every homeowner here knows exactly how you tried to cover it up. The board members exchanged panicked glances. Several residents in the crowd started whispering more loudly now, nodding and pointing at me. Richard tried to regain control. This meeting is adjourned until further notice. Before he could bolt, I added, and by the way, the locksmith already billed the HOA directly. That invoice is legally binding. I turned and walked out, the clubhouse erupting into a low roar behind me. My phone buzzed with a dozen new texts from neighbors offering support, asking for copies of my evidence and suggesting a full HOA leadership recall. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt like we actually had a shot at taking it back from the petty tyrants who thought they owned us. And I wasn't about to let up now. The following morning, the sun hadn't even fully risen when my doorbell rang. I was already up, sipping coffee and reviewing the emails pouring in from neighbors. Word had spread fast, and it seemed like almost everyone was fed up with the board's antics. I opened the door to find a manila envelope sitting on the doormat, with no one in sight. Picking it up carefully, I noticed the HOA's letterhead stamped sloppily on the front. Inside was a hastily written notice. Cease and desist unauthorized communications regarding HOA matters. Further violations will result in legal action. No signature, no official stamps, just a pathetic attempt to silence me. I laughed under my breath, set it on the counter, and grabbed my keys. I had an appointment downtown at a law office recommended by Officer Ramos. As I pulled into the parking garage, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. A scratchy voice warned me to drop the complaints before things got messy. I saved the message immediately. Whoever thought intimidation would work clearly hadn't done their homework. The law office sat on the 10th floor of a glass building overlooking the courthouse. Inside, the decor was all dark wood and deep leather chairs. I met with attorney Lisa Tran, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who wasted no time getting to the point. "You've got enough here to wreck them," she said, flipping through my folder. False imprisonment, abuse of authority, property damage. And now harassment. I leaned forward. "Can we go after the board too?" "Not just Marlene." Lisa nodded. "Depending on what we uncover, absolutely. If they knew about her actions, or worse, encouraged them, they're just as liable." We spent the next hour drafting a formal complaint to the City Housing Authority and preparing a civil suit. Lisa also recommended filing a restraining order against Marlene individually, given the voicemail threat, and suggested we subpoena HOA financial records. If they were this reckless out in the open, there was no telling what was hidden in their books. By the time I left the office, I had a neat stack of paperwork ready to drop off at the courthouse. I made a quick stop at the police station first, turning over the voicemail recording and filing an official harassment report. Ramos assured me it was already being attached to Marlene's growing case file. Back home, the neighborhood had transformed. Little clusters of residents stood in driveways, talking in low, animated voices. As I pulled into my driveway, my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, hurried over from across the street. "We're organizing," she said, lowering her voice. "We're tired of them." This was the last straw. I nodded. "Good. We're going to need signatures." "We're ready," she said, determination flashing in her eyes. Inside my house, I set up a simple website outlining the issues, complete with uploaded copies of the police report, the locksmith invoice, and the cease and desist letter. I made sure everything was factual, no exaggerations, just cold hard evidence. Within an hour, people were sharing it like wildfire. That evening, the HOA board sent out another emergency notice calling for an informational session at the clubhouse. Curious to see how desperate they had gotten, I decided to attend. The room was packed when I arrived. Folding chairs lined every wall, and people stood shoulder to shoulder. A few board members sat stiffly behind the table at the front, but there was a new face among them, a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Richard Hammond, legal counsel for the HOA. He cleared his throat into the microphone. "The board wishes to clarify that recent events were the result of misunderstandings and internal miscommunications. No individual acted with malicious intent." The crowd muttered. I stayed silent, arms crossed, waiting. "We ask that residents refrain from spreading misinformation," Hammond continued, "and trust that the board is taking appropriate steps." I raised my hand. Hammond hesitated, then pointed reluctantly in my direction. "Is it misinformation if we have police reports, official invoices, and recorded harassment?" I asked. The room quieted instantly. Hammond faltered for a split second. "We cannot comment on ongoing investigations," he said. "So you're admitting there's an investigation?" pressed. He glanced at the board members, who looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. "We acknowledge that certain incidents are under review," Hammond said carefully. Another resident, Mr. Thompson, spoke up from the back. "Are HOA funds being used to pay for your lawyer?" The color drained from Richard Gilmore's face. He opened his mouth, but Hammond cut him off. "All financial matters are confidential." "Not to the homeowners," I said. "We fund the HOA. We have every right to inspect the records." Several people shouted their agreement. Mrs. Patel stepped forward, holding up a petition sheet already filled with signatures. "We're calling for a full audit and a vote to remove the current board," she announced. The room erupted. Hammond tried to regain control, but it was like trying to bail water with a sieve. The residents had tasted blood, and they weren't letting go. Back at home later that night, I received an email from Lisa Tran. She had filed the civil suit, and the subpoenas for HOA financial records were approved. It was official. The HOA was now under legal scrutiny. The next few days unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck for the board. Financial audits revealed that Marlene had authorized thousands of dollars in beautification projects without resident approval, hiring her nephew's landscaping company at inflated rates. Worse, surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera showed Marlene entering my property with bolt cutters before chaining the door. That footage made its way into the hands of the district attorney's office. When the DA formally announced criminal charges against Marlene, breaking and entering, unlawful imprisonment, harassment, and conspiracy to defraud, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. News vans parked along the main road, reporters swarming for interviews. I declined comment, but others didn't. Stories of Marlene's petty abuses piled up: fines for Halloween decorations, threats over flag displays, citations for kids' lemonade stands. The HOA board collapsed within a week. Richard Gilmore resigned in disgrace, along with the treasurer and secretary. An emergency election was scheduled, and a group of sane, reasonable residents stepped up to run. Election day felt less like voting and more like a festival. Families gathered on the clubhouse lawn with coolers and lawn chairs. Kids played tag in the grass while adults lined up at the voting booths. I cast my ballot with a smile, knowing we were taking our community back. Later that evening, Mrs. Patel knocked on my door with a bottle of champagne. "You started this," she said. "You saved us." I laughed and accepted the bottle. We all did it together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, neighbors gathered in driveways, laughing and celebrating. The chains Marlene had once wrapped around my door were now a distant memory, replaced by something she could never lock up: our community's spirit. And for the first time since moving here, I actually felt at home. The new board wasted no time getting to work. Within the first week after the election, they scheduled a full town hall meeting, not the kind of secretive, rushed ones we had gotten used to under Marlene's reign, but a real, open forum where every resident had a say. It was held at the community park under string lights with folding chairs and a rented sound system. People brought their dogs, their kids, even lawn games. It felt like a block party more than anything else. I sat near the front with Mrs. Patel and a few of the new board members, watching as chairs filled fast. The atmosphere buzzed with a kind of cautious hope, like everyone was still holding their breath, waiting to see if this whole movement would actually stick. Aisling Gwynn, the freshly elected president, tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we're going to start putting this neighborhood back in the hands of its people. No more secret fines, no more threats, and definitely no more chains on anyone's doors." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was warm, not bitter. Ashley continued, "First order of business: full transparency. We've hired an independent auditor to dig through the HOA's financials from the last 5 years. A low murmur spread through the crowd. 5 years meant they were looking well beyond Marlene's recent stunts. Several people exchanged glances, probably wondering what else might come out. "And second," Ashley said, flipping a page on her clipboard, "we've opened a hotline with the city's housing department for residents to anonymously report any misconduct they experienced under the previous administration." At that, an older man in the third row stood up. He wore a faded veteran's cap and had a cane balanced against his knee. "I want to say something," he said, voice steady. Ashley nodded and held out the mic. The man introduced himself as Mr. Dalton. Turns out, 2 years ago, Marlene had fined him almost $3,000 for non-compliant exterior paint, even though he had the original builder's paperwork proving the color was pre-approved. When he contested it, Marlene threatened to place a lien on his house. Too proud and tired to fight, he paid it. Gasps and angry whispers filled the air as he spoke. I clenched my jaw. It was one thing to bully someone like me who could fight back, it was another to intimidate a veteran out of his own money. Ashley didn't hesitate. "Mr. Dalton will be reviewing all past fines. If they're found to be fraudulent, the HOA will issue full refunds, with interest." The crowd burst into applause. As the meeting wrapped up, I spotted Lisa Tran weaving through the crowd toward me. She wore a tailored navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "We got something," she said without preamble. The forensic accountant found discrepancies in the HOA's bank statements. I leaned closer. "How bad?" "Bad enough that the district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into embezzlement." My eyebrows lifted. "You're saying Marlene wasn't just abusing her power, she was stealing?" Lisa nodded. "And not small amounts. We're talking tens of thousands skimmed through fake invoices, shell companies, and kickbacks." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Officer Ramos. I stepped a few feet away and answered. "We've got her," Ramos said. "Marlene's been arrested. Fraud, embezzlement, criminal conspiracy. Looks like she tried to flee the state last night but got picked up at the airport." I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight I hadn't realized was still pressing on my chest finally lift. "What's next?" I asked. "She'll be arraigned tomorrow. DA's pushing for no bail, given the flight risk." I thanked him and hung up, turning back to Lisa. "She's not getting away with it," I said. Lisa gave a small smile. "Not this time." 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the back of a wood-paneled courtroom watching Marlene being led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked nothing like the woman who once strutted around the neighborhood wielding her clipboard like a weapon. Her hair was disheveled, her face drawn and pale. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, read through the list of charges. It took almost 5 minutes just to get through them all. Fraud, embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, harassment, tampering with private property, abuse of fiduciary duty. The list went on. When the judge denied bail, citing not only the severity of the crimes but also the attempt to flee, Marlene's shoulders sagged visibly. Her lawyer whispered frantically, but it was clear the damage was done. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters gathered. I stayed back, not interested in becoming a public figure, but I couldn't help feeling a grim satisfaction watching Marlene's downfall play out in real time. That evening, Ashley and the new board hosted a celebration at the park. No speeches, no official business, just food trucks, live music, and laughter echoing under the stars. Kids chased each other around the playground while neighbors shared beers and swapped stories about the old days and the better ones ahead. Mr. Dalton sat in a lawn chair near the fire pit, telling a group of teenagers about his time overseas. Mrs. Patel organized a cornhole tournament. Even Mr. Jensen, who had once been too nervous to even make eye contact, was out there tossing beanbags and laughing. As I stood there, plate of barbecue in hand, Ashley came over. "You know," she said, "none of this would have happened without you." I shook my head. "Wasn't just me. It was everyone deciding enough was enough." She smiled. "Still, you lit the match." I thought back to the day I found the chain on my front door, the sense of disbelief, the anger. It had seemed so personal then, just me against a petty tyrant. I hadn't realized it was the spark that would set the whole rotten system on fire. Later, as the crowd thinned and the stars brightened overhead, I wandered down the path toward the edge of the park. A small plaque had been installed near the entrance, simple and unadorned. It read, "Community is built by the courage to stand together." I ran my fingers lightly over the words, feeling the cool metal under my hand. In the end, it wasn't about a chain, or a door, or even an HOA. It was about a neighborhood remembering it belonged to its people, not to a handful of bullies with a taste for power. As I walked back toward the music and laughter, I knew one thing for certain: they would never let anyone chain them up again.